You're listening to part one of a two-part episode with Irene Butter. We're talking about her incredible story of surviving the Holocaust. I hope you'll listen to both segments as it is full of inspiration and hope. Welcome to Baker Street. This is Thom Pollard bringing you episode 24, a powerful episode that will surely leave an imprint upon you as it has me already. We'll be talking with Irene Butter, a wonderful woman who as a child survived the Holocaust with her family, and for decades she didn't breathe a word about it to anyone until a sort of revelation came to her, and ever since that revelation, she's been sharing her message and story of inspiration to students and people around the world. She also wrote an amazing book about it called Shores Beyond Shores, From Holocaust to Hope, My True Story. And I will tell you a lot more about the book, and we'll meet Irene shortly. The music we're listening to was found on the Free Music Archive, and it is by Tagirijus, and that can be found at the website tagirijus.de, and I will post that on the podcast and YouTube links to this. And I'm giving the performer credit as I hope to bring attention to the beautiful music that you're hearing, and hope that you'll look it up. We're sampling from the album Cinematic, House of Lost Souls, which, for me at least, on occasion, is probably appropriate for today's subject matter. It's autumn here in New Hampshire. The colors of the fall foliage were magnificent, the best in recent memory or long memory. This was a great fall for foliage. And then literally 2 days after the peak turned and the colors started to fade a bit, a heavy rainstorm came through and knocked all the colors to the ground. And now my driveway is a blanket of yellows and golds and oranges and reds, and it's very, very beautiful. And today is an intoxicatingly beautiful, warm autumn day. Autumn has always been a time of reflection for me. I'm really a summer guy at heart who's always made the best of winter with skiing and ice climbing and mountaineering, obviously, and right down to the most awesome snowball fights with my sons. This summer, despite the pretty amazing weather that we had, other than a little bit of a chilly August, I felt kind of flat upon my return from Mount Everest, and my creativity and motivation really took a nosedive. I found it really difficult to make progress on my book, my memoir, which I'm writing. And for those of you who have any experience writing anything about your own experiences, it's a grueling process, and you have to dig deep into the experiences that you've had in the past. And for me, particularly those that I've had on Mount Everest, from the highs of summiting in 2016 to coming virtually face to face with death and people who lost their lives on many occasions, on more than I care to count. So the writing of a memoir takes effort, and I just wasn't finding the desire to reignite those feelings that I know I'd have to dive into and look at honestly in order to write this the way a memoir should be written. Jordan Peterson, in a podcast or a YouTube video that I listened to recently, talked about this alchemical saying that Jung was fond of talking about: in sterquilinus invenitur, in filth it will be found. And it's something that basically says that which we most wish to discover can be found where we least want to look. And so consequently and further, the darker and deeper the well within which we look, the brighter the light at the bottom. So simply put, this is what defines courage to face our troubles. So I know these ideas have been out there for generations or more, thousands of years, Socratic philosophy and beyond. But for me, it wasn't really until Jordan Peterson opened my eyes to it that it became clear how one can also begin to identify how it's possible for there to be a growth in the potential of evil, in that those afraid to confront now we're talking at least on a societal level, the evils which undermine or percolate underneath, if they're not confronted, it gives a rise to evil. I mean, and so just look at Nazi Germany in the 20th century and Russia and the list goes on. And while I don't know who said this first, Jordan Peterson uttered it, and he said something like, "The horrors of the totalitarian state are laid at the feet of the citizens who refuse to take ethical responsibility for their inactions," meaning that in not speaking up, they become complicit in it. You can bring something approximating hell into being just as a consequence of your moral choices, and those being that you choose not to speak up or confront those inner demons. And imagine that just really, so taking into consideration Nazi Germany of, into 1930s and 40s, but obviously on a wider span, what took place in those years, which we're going to talk about later. Imagine if it's possible for something that horrible to come into being. Just imagine the corresponding power for us as individuals to make things good. That's where we realize that as individuals we have an absolutely incredible opportunity to make change for the better in our lives, and to try to get past that fear to face our inner demons or the things that haunt us. So why am I going off in this tangential trajectory? It's for me a fitting open to a recent interview I did on Skype with an amazing woman named Irene Butter. I'd been introduced to her and her literary agent and publisher by an old friend of mine. The literary agent and publisher is Mary Bisbee Beek, who I had an amazing phone conversation with before I met Irene. But my friend, who coincidentally with his wife helped write Irene's book about her experiences surviving the Holocaust. And the book is called Shores Beyond Shores, From Holocaust to Hope, My True Story. And my friend, John Bidwell, and his wife, Chris Holloway, co-wrote the book with Irene after doing hours upon hours of Skype interviews. And I'm sure it was grueling work for all three of them, but for Irene to dig up these memories that had been dormant for decades and decades and decades. Irene's first-person memoir, Shores Beyond Shores, is an account of how the heart keeps its common humanity in the most inhumane and turbulent of times. Irene's hard-earned lessons are a timeless inspiration. I will admit that in the reading of this book, I cried a lot of times. It touched something very deeply in me. And when the book was over, even though it came as close to what could be, ironically, a happy ending in a book about the Holocaust, I was so emotionally moved and spent from it. It literally took me days to kind of get back on my feet, at which time I began preparing for my interview with Irene. I was starstruck when I met her, and she was an amazing interview, and I realized that instead of going chronologically, I just began bouncing all around. So for brevity, the audio portion of this podcast is going to be broken up into two segments, and a YouTube video will follow, which will be presented in its entirety, just to show you everything and how my mind kind of bounced back and forth a little bit. So let's let's get to it. I'd like you to meet Irene, whom I interviewed on Skype here in my studio. Well, here we are talking, and I'm really honored to meet you, and I look forward to someday meeting you in person, but this will have to do for now.
Right.
Um,
Well, I just want to say that Chris and John played a very important role in making this book a reality and making the book what it became, because we spent countless hours on Skype together talking, and they recaptured memories that were long forgotten. So, and helped me bring back the voice of the child early in the book, which all of us agreed was really important for this endeavor. So they deserve a lot of credit.
So John and Chris reached out to me and said that they thought you would be a lovely subject for my podcast, and you said it well. When in the hours and hours of Skype interviews with them, and I'm going to let you do the talking because I'm interested to hear what you have to say, but you uncovered things that you had hidden away. And I guess when you arrived in the United States in 1945, everybody said, never talk about it again. It's over.
Right.
But boy, it must have been percolating in there, because it sounds like it came out and you were able to really realize some great things from actually being able to talk about it. As a child growing up in Berlin, your childhood started out so perfectly and lovely, and then little things started to change in your life, like the day that you and your brother were walking down the street and you saw the Nazi flags lining the streets before the Olympics. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit, how you saw things that were out of place, and it was like you almost didn't know what was happening because it was taking place gradually?
Right. Yes. Well, seeing the young people who were in the Hitler Youth, there was a lot of pressure on young men to join the Hitler Youth, and then they wore a uniform and a swastika armband, and to see all those swastikas and exhibited on flags all over the place. Of course, as a little kid, I didn't know what that meant, but it was fascinating. Why all of a sudden we see these things, and what are they all about? What do they mean? And then you gradually saw the cruelty, of people getting beaten up and shops being invaded and vandalized and synagogues well, I wasn't in Germany anymore for Kristallnacht, which was in 1937, I think, or maybe 1939, and we left in 37. But of course, everybody knows about that period, and that was mass murder for the first time. So in my own life, the big event that changed everything was that my grandfather owned a bank, and my father was partner. And then all of a sudden, Jews couldn't own banks anymore, and the bank was taken away, and my father was unemployed. And so he decided to go to Holland, because Holland stayed neutral in World War I. And he thought if we could emigrate, then maybe we would be safe from Hitler. Now, of course, that didn't happen, but he did get a position with the American Express Company in Amsterdam. And for 2 years, I wouldn't say 2 years were harmonious, because, of course, the whole, all of Europe was in uproar as country after country was invaded and Jews were persecuted. But we lived in Amsterdam for 2 years before the Nazis invaded. And then almost overnight, Holland became an occupied country and the Nazis took over. and the persecution of Jews escalated. So that was the first big shock, because I grew up with my grandparents, my parents, my brother who was 2 years older than I, and my grandparents. And when we moved to Holland, they couldn't come along. They weren't allowed to. So that was the first big shock of family breakup.
Yeah, the really great part about the way you wrote the book is it really felt like you remembered so clearly the minute details, and I loved your brother's role in it. He was almost like a thermometer, like taking the temperature of all the circumstances around you. Your brother was like a reporter. Oh, this is happening, and what an incredible way for you to be slowly kind of introduced to the awful things that were taking place around you. Your brother was just, like, obviously by nature an incredibly curious and obviously a highly intelligent kid who was watching things change.
And the saddest part is that he had an incredible memory, and he remembered things I didn't remember. But when I started seriously working on the book, he was already quite ill and then passed away. So he never saw the book, which is such a shame. But at least his 2 children and 4 grandchildren, they have read the book and encompassed it. And I recently visited my nephew and his wife and his family, and I noticed that he had taken on the phrase which occurs in the book quite often, like, "Let's go, Hasenbergs."
Yeah. Yes, I loved that. It was a great theme throughout. Is it called a Posey book? Is that how you pronounce it?
Well, in Holland we pronounce it poëzie.
Poëzie. Could you tell me a little bit about that book, because it's incredible? It to me, I'm guessing that it survived when you gave it.
Yes, I have it.
Incredible.
I have it. Well, I didn't take it with me to the camps, but
Well, it might not have survived had you done that.
most likely it wouldn't have. And well, actually, I think at one point I had it in my backpack, that was packed for the day when we would be deported. But I took it out again, and I think a neighbor kept it for us and returned it after the war, including all the photos, which we wouldn't have had she not been willing to preserve them for us. She was a photographer, and she said, well, if the Nazis come into our house, they can't question my having pictures.
Yeah. So it sounds like that a lot of people near you didn't, and like this neighbor of yours, didn't share the sentiment of the Nazis, that that nothing changed for them. They cared for you, and they took risks that, had they been caught, they could have been killed, right?
Yes, right, yeah.
And what was the process like to have to slowly give away all your belongings, not sure if you'd ever be able to return, when giving away your bike, for instance, and your favorite dolls and things like that?
Well, the bike was critical because we weren't allowed to use public transportation. Jews were not allowed, so the bike came in handy to get to places that were too far to walk at any time. So when the bike was confiscated, that was a big blow. And well, an interesting story is that one of the children, one of the little girls in the neighborhood, she's 7 years younger than I am, and I once invited her to come to my house and pick any toy she wanted, and she picked a doll's bed, and she had that doll's bed. I made contact with her about 6, 7 years ago, recontacted, and she told me she had this doll's bed for many years, and her children had it, and her grandchildren had it. And she said she always remembered me because I was the only bigger kid that played with her. And so she found me on the internet, and we corresponded. And 2 years ago, my husband and I celebrated our 62nd wedding anniversary in Amsterdam because we were married there. And then I saw her several times, and that was incredible, just to see someone from your childhood.
Oh, it is incredible. Irene, so there's so much in your book. And I'm going to tell you, this is the truth. I cried a lot reading the book. I'm emotional just recounting it. And despite the fact that at the end, even though your dad passed away at the moment of freedom, and in respect, it was about as happy an ending as you could get, if there is one to that. When I put this down, I couldn't stop crying from happiness and sadness. I felt every emotion that could possibly happen was conveyed perfectly in this book. And the way I felt like I was friends with all your friends, and I felt like I knew your mom and dad. It's really incredible that you were able to do that, and I'm amazed at it. But you were telling me that it was a lot due to the process of going through it with John and Chris, and just talking over and over and over.
And we knew each other quite some time because Chris was my student here at Michigan, and we got to know each other very well. That this was the time when Aiden was born, and she was still a student, and so I took care of him sometimes when she was doing research and going to classes, and so we became very close. And I don't know if it could have been done with other people, and also there were times it was very, very difficult. And so they always, we had to take breaks, but they always pulled me back in.
Yeah, it must have been very difficult at times to recount some of the uglier scenes.
Right. Yeah. It's like opening up scars.
Yeah, something in the middle of the book, like being at the camps, and suddenly, right near where you slept at night in the bunks, there were bodies, and it almost became normal, where something 2 years before would have been the most shocking thing in the world, but suddenly the most horrific scenes in the world was day-to-day life for you.
That's exactly right. Yes.
So could you just recount a little bit the story about finding freedom and your dad, and you made it to the United States? Just kind of that the fact that you actually got out was due to the wonderful work that maybe somehow the behind the scenes, your dad having friends and getting the passports to Central America, and even though they were fake, somehow that gave you some value. Could you explain that to me? So suddenly you were a trading chip or something? Or?
Right, because the Nazis were very eager to get back not only prisoners of war, but more, I think in larger numbers, German citizens who had come to the Americas in the early 20th century and lived there, looking for a better life or whatever. And so then when World War II started, there was this hysteria about spies, and they were all considered spies and put in internment camps. And so actually, we were exchanged largely for a group of German citizens who came from an internment camp in Texas called Crystal City. There's a book about Train to Crystal City. And these people, didn't want to go back to Germany, but they were exiled. And they had to go. So here was I, a Jewish kid, no real connection to America. And then there's this family who had lived here for years. They had 3 children in America, and they were forced to go back to Germany as part of this exchange. Now, Germany was at war. There were food shortages. I think the father was imprisoned in Germany because he was considered a traitor, having gone to America. It was all unbelievable. And so the woman who wrote the book, her name is Jan Russell, The Train to Crystal City, she kind of made a connection because there was a 14-year-old girl in that family, and I was 14. Like, we were exchanged for each other. And these kids that were American citizens were very angry. And the first chance they had, they came back to America. And so she, the writer, found this family and interviewed them. And so at one point, and she also interviewed me, she said, well, we have to find a way to get you to meet Ingrid so you could meet each other. And then she said that Ingrid had been so angry at Germany for a long time, but when she heard that her being forced to go back to Germany liberated a girl same age as she was then, that made her feel better. But we never got to meet because she died before the book came out.
In part 2 of our interview with Irene Butter, she'll talk about the liberation from Bergen-Belsen concentration camp and what happened in the years after, and how a request from her daughter was what finally got her to a place in her life where she thought it was good to share stories about her experience of the Holocaust. If you'd like to learn more about Irene and her story, look for her at irenebutter.com. That's IRENE butter.com. And the publisher of her book, Shores Beyond Shores, From Holocaust to Hope, My True Story, is canofworms.net, just as it sounds, canofworms.net. This powerful book was written in collaboration with my friends, old friends, John Bidwell and Chris Holloway, a husband and wife dynamic duo that apparently are capable of darn near anything. This book really impacted me greatly. I was so impressed at the depth that they went into to develop the characters, the real people that were part of Irene's life growing up. If you're interested in finding out more about me, I hope you'll go to eyesopenproductions.com and click on Contact. Send me a real short message and tell me that you want to join my mailing list. This is part 2 of a 2-part episode featuring my interview with Irene Butter, a woman who survived the Holocaust, and many years after she came to the United States as a young girl, she wrote the book Shores Beyond Shores, From Holocaust to Hope, My True Story, by Irene Butter, with John Bidwell and Chris Holloway. Here's part 2. In segment 1 of our 2-part episode with Irene Butter, we talked about her book. She wrote the book in collaboration with some old friends of mine. They used to actually live across the street from me and my family, John Bidwell and Chris Holloway. And Chris was a student of Irene's at the University of Michigan and developed a very close friendship that enabled them to find this strength that was required for Irene to open up old wounds, to actually go reinvestigate the deep pains that had been caused by her experiences in the Holocaust. So in part 2, we are going to talk about the liberation of Camp Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen was a concentration camp. It was not a death camp. However, there was such incredible brutality, just sadistic medical tests that took place there, a lot of starvation and sickness and overwork. Typhus was rampant there. Typhus is a bacteria-borne disease that is passed on to humans through mice and ticks or fleas. The stories there are horrific, truly. Irene talks about them so that she can get to her story of hope and what turned her from, if you will, from living a life where she never talked about her experiences on the Holocaust to realizing that sharing her story could really impact the lives of many. Here's part 2. The book is a real timepiece. It's important, and I had learned, just like any kid growing up in the United States, I suppose, about the Holocaust, and learned whatever they taught, but you had a really busy, thriving career, and working at a university, and had I don't know if you could say it was an epiphany, but something in you made you realize that you needed to share this story, and it sounds like you retired early, and you've devoted your life to keeping this story alive. And tell me why and how that came to be.
Sure. Well, there were kind of 3 events that I remember. The first one was my daughter. She was in middle school here in Ann Arbor, and she was taking a course in public speaking. At the end of the term, she had to do a 1-hour speech. And her topic that she chose was anti-Semitism, Hitler's conquest of Europe, and the concentration camps in 1 hour. And she came home and she said, "Mom, will you be my visual aid?"
Wow.
And she gave me 15 minutes of her hour to describe life in the concentration camps. And I was shocked because I'd never spoken in public, and I'd hardly ever even spoken with my family. So, but how could I turn her down? And even though I was petrified to go to a class of middle schoolers, how would they react? Were they going to fall asleep? Were they going to make fun of me? Were they going to be angry? I didn't know what to expect, but it went well, and that kind of broke the silence for the first time. And then some years later, there was an Anne Frank exhibition that traveled throughout the country and came to Detroit. That was in the late 1980s. And I was invited to participate on a panel to talk about Anne Frank. And as I thought about my role on this panel, it dawned on me that Anna didn't survive, and her voice was silenced forever. But I was the gift of life. So I needed to tell these stories because no one else could. And so that then started my going to schools. I started getting invitations, and that was more than 35 years ago, and I'm still doing it.
Incredible. And I should add for the people listening or viewing this that you knew Anne Frank. That was a neighbor of yours in
Right.
Amsterdam.
Correct. We lived in the same neighborhood. I did not know her well. She and I did not go to the same school, but we had a mutual friend, a friend that was in Anne Frank's class, and she was lived on the same street as I did, and she would often talk about Anna because Anna was, she was a very visible child, and I think she was very naughty, and so there were lots of stories about her that I enjoyed hearing. I knew what she looked like, but we didn't really know each other in any direct way. And then I did meet her in Bergen-Belsen one night, and that was because one of Anna's friends was in the same barrack, lived in the same barrack as I did, and one night we were separated because Anna and her sister Margaret came from Auschwitz when Auschwitz was liquidated, and they lived in a different camp, and we were separated by barbed wire, and we were not allowed to speak to each other. So at night, this friend of Anna's walked one night, and she heard some people speak Dutch, and so she asked somebody, said, "Is Anne Frank in this camp?" And it happened to be so. So this woman called Anna to the fence, and I wasn't with her friend Hanneli then, but she met her, and she said she came back to the barrack and told me she had seen her and that she was very pale and very thin, and she didn't have clothing. All she had was a gray blanket wrapped around her, and she asked if Hanneli could uh, throw over a bundle of clothing. Could she find some clothing to share? And so Hanneli came to the barrack, and she and I both, we had some of our own clothing. They were never taken away. They were rags, but they were clothing nevertheless, and some other people. And so then the next night I went with Hanneli. See, you could only go at night in the dark. The guards in the guideposts wouldn't see us because everything was always kept dark because of the bombers. And so then I went with Hanneli, and we met Anna, and we had this bundle of clothing and threw it over the fence, and another woman came, picked it up, and ran off with it. And then that was just before my family left the camp on this prisoner exchange. And so many years later, I met Hanneli in Jerusalem. Hanneli survived and then went to Palestine after the war ended. And then she told me that she threw over another bundle. And Anne Frank did get it, but her sister, Margot, she had typhus, and she was so sick she couldn't come to the fence and talk to us, and we don't think they lived much longer than that night when we saw Anna.
So people were so weakened from lack of nutrition and food, and in the case of your parents at least, like so overworked without the nutrition that people were literally just dying in the camp. And when you did get involved in the trade and you were put on a train to leave, your mom and dad were in such a weakened state. I didn't know the ending of the book. I didn't think your parents were going to get on that train. They sound like they were beyond weak. And it's incredible just the willpower and the desire to get mom and dad.
Miracles. Well, my mother had been bedridden for several months, and some friends carried her to the train because she wouldn't have been able to walk. And my dad, he also was very, very weak. And later on, we learned that he had been beaten badly, and he might have had some internal injury we didn't know about. The fear, of course, was that my mother would die on the train. That was our fear.
Yeah, not your dad as much. Your mom, you thought, because your mom could barely lift her head. And what blew my mind, really, which was that when you went to sign in the day before, you were mistaken as your mom. They checked her off on the list, and here's a 13, 14-year-old girl, and they thought it was a woman of 30 or 40 years old who was probably looked 90 at the time.
Right. Yes. Well, it's a miracle. There were several miracles. What I call miracles, because you can't explain them.
Your family made it out. You defied odds against odds, and you made it. And although your dad passed on the train, he made it to freedom. He was the backbone of this family, and that's your dad. It was almost like, I can go now because I accomplished what I have been working so hard to accomplish.
Yeah, it seems that way. And I've heard that a number of times of people who are very ill, that they hold on for a certain moment and then they know they can go.
Well, I could probably ask you 100 questions, and I'm not going to because you've been kind enough with your time, but I do want to ask you a little bit about how important it is and has been in your life to share your story, and at least the core message of what are you endeavoring to convey to the students that you speak to? What's your goal for them? And and you could share that with me and us, because it's incredible you're sharing the story, but there's something beyond just telling them an amazing story.
Well, there are definite points that I always want to leave with the students when I talk to them. And one of them is never a bystander. There's a documentary that someone here in Ann Arbor made about me by that title, about going to the schools and talking to students. And it's so much easier to turn your back to things that you don't approve of, don't want to bother, don't want to make the effort, but that we all have a responsibility. We need to protect each other. We need to respect each other. And we can't be passive when things happen. It may be one group that's targeted one day, but then tomorrow it may be another group that's targeted, and someday it could be us. And we have to keep that in mind. So that's one lesson. Another one is one person can make a difference. And often we think of ourselves as being so small, and the problems are so large, and so we don't do anything. But that's not the case. We can all make a difference, and no matter how small, it counts. What we do matters, and what we don't do matters as well. And the third point I like to make emphatically, because I've learned from students that when I tell my story, they tell me their stories, and there are tragedies in so many young people's lives, whether it's divorce, whether it's illness, whether it's homelessness, whether my dad is in prison. There are so many family tragedies, and then they connect with me and they share their stories. And so, what I like to tell them is you can triumph over tragedy. You may be a victim at some point, but that doesn't mean you have to be a victim for the rest of your life. And taking a stand and holding on to hope will make a difference.
Well, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me tonight. I'm honored, and I really will look for any opportunity to maybe cross paths if you're in the Northeast, and it's moved me a lot, and it's been very inspiring, and I myself speak in front of audiences, often sharing my stories about climbing Mount Everest and my adventures, and what you just left me with is really poignant, because I try to leave, especially the young people, with something meaningful. And I guess you could say, as you share with the kids, it's you can triumph over tragedy, and what a great message. Thank you.
Well, I often get the question from even young kids, and they'll say, what kind of person do you think you would have become if you hadn't lived through the Holocaust? Which always baffles me that a young person would come up with that question. Of course, it's unanswerable, but it does make you think. And I recently saw in a book, I had a conversation in New York at the Museum of Jewish Heritage with Andrew Solomon. And so he has a statement, I don't know if it was in a TED Talk or one of his books, and he says, it's the most, well, I'm not exactly quoting, I'm paraphrasing, it's the most difficult moments in our lives that make us who we are.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Well, the book is Shores Beyond Shores, From Holocaust to Hope, My True Story, by Irene Butter, and John Bidwell and Chris Holloway were obviously instrumental in this book ever making the light of day. And
absolutely.
And that girl who was in your class in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, some years ago, what a fortuitous thing for me and for all the people who have come into contact with you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. A pleasure to meet you, and I enjoyed the conversation.
It was an honor to have the opportunity to speak with Irene about her book, Shores Beyond Shores, From Holocaust to Hope, My True Story, that was written in collaboration with two friends of mine, John Bidwell and Chris Holloway. I was moved by this book, and if you are interested in finding out any more about it, you can go to Irene's website that John put together. It's irenebutter.com, irenebutter.com, and the publishing website, canofworms.net. And there are also a lot of other books on there that might be of interest to you, but I strongly encourage you to get this book and share it with friends and family. And if you enjoyed what you heard here on Baker Street with Thom Pollard, I do hope you will share it with your friends and family. Primarily what I want to do right now is thank John Bidwell and Chris Holloway, old friends of mine, for introducing me to Irene Butter and Mary Bisbee Beek, which is Irene's agent, and for sharing her story with me. Irene tells a passionate story, and it's heartbreaking, but it's also full of so much inspiration and hope. As you know, at Baker Street with Thom Pollard, we endeavor to bring stories of passion and joy and hope and introduce you to people who have found their core spirit. One person at a time, we can change this world, and it is stories like Irene's that truly bring hope and inspiration even to the most downtrodden and depressed of people. I hope you'll share this with your friends and family, and I hope you'll reach out to me with any ideas or thoughts. It's always such an honor to have you here. Thank you so much, and we will certainly see you all real soon.